the physical space becomes more and more limited, this is, I think, one of the options we have. But the other option is that, and that's what I really try to focus on in Zurich, is that we do not always install a public artwork permanently. So it means for eternity, but also to give it a chance for a limited time to enter a dialogue with the audience and with the city and with the context, and maybe then disappear again, you know. So and I think that's one of the options we have, and one of the very important also strategies for artists, you know, not only think about eternity but also temporarity.
I think that is a really key part of continuing the relevance, is to have this sort of temporality inbuilt into public art systems, because I think, you know, a lot of negative perception around public art is based on these like permanent eyesores that, you know, are impossible to be removed. So I think having something that can really critically respond to a certain social or political context and space at the time, and acknowledge that shifts.
Liu Wei, do you have anything to add?
对，就是刚才谈到这种关于公共空间的这种就是公共永恒性的问题，但我也在想，就是说，其实还有一个层面，这个辨认的问题，你如何辨认什么是一个公共艺术？有什么样的图像会给大众带来一个带来一个新，比如带来一个思考啊，带来一个这种问题，就是包括其实我们看就是现在的一个，就比如我们现在所处的周围的风景改变，对我来说特别允许，其实就像一个巨大的公共艺术一样，因为以前复杂的情况被清除了，变成一个就像 Windows 界面一样的一个绿地，然后这个图景对我来说特别有意义的一个图景。我觉得这个如果说比如对于大家对于公众来说，他们能意识到这个图景的变化的意义和这个美学的意义，我觉得是有意思的。包括现在的所谓参数建筑，其实它都是背后都隐藏的，无论是审美也好什么的，就在这个建筑里面，是因为我们就是技术和资本的和分工的改变，导致了一定这样一个一切的生活，一切都在一个单行的建筑里面被解决了。但是这个单行建筑里没有任何多余的东西，不像你真正的一个生存里面是有各种不同的东西，这所有的东西就完全被榨干了，所有的一切多余的一切，其实你生活中更需要的一些东西，而不只是你饿了吃，然后睡觉的地方。我觉得，所以我们在看有时候比如在那个 SOHO 里面，我们在吃一个饭的时候，我的一个朋友来说，他妈的连个街都没有，怎么吃饭？他会有这个想法。对，我觉得还是跟公共生活，包括其实艺术家，的工作能够改变很多的就是社区改变。其实说起改造对我来说，其实并不是一个好，他们有一个叫市生化嘛，就是说把这样的人赶走了，再改造社区，但社区搬出来的人变成一个中产，就是更有钱的人，而这些穷人依然穷的，犯罪率依然存在，只是赶到别的地方去。但是比较好的例子对艺术家来说，比如说 CSKS 做的芝加哥的项目，它的社区虽然我没去过，但听上去是一个有意思的一个改造。我觉得这是艺术家做的事情。这个东西它既有美学，也有现实中的东西，它不是那么特别强调的是我只做一个艺术作品一个人的东西，但是这个对我来说才是真正的艺术可能。
I think this is a really good point. I think artists have to be our guide through this process, right? And I mean, we as institutions or as kind of professionals in this space are there to shepherd projects into the world. And the example of Fiesta Gates and what he's done in Chicago, I think, is a really good one that kind of blends some kind of development with some kind of social practice, with some kind of artistic production. And I mean, Liu Wei's work has been, I think, really inspiring to a lot of people in a similar way. Weirdly, like, I look at what he does and I look at the space of his studio even as this kind of semi-public formation of where you have suddenly a convening of different kinds of workers and different kinds of knowledges and experiences that kind of end up leaving their mark on these objects that then like images that get produced. So yeah, I guess all to say, in a context where that classical notion of public space and democratic engagement is not really the norm, you look for different pockets where these kinds of interesting interactions and convergences can happen.
Thanks for that. Maybe we can leave time for the audience. Is there any questions that you would like to ask? If there's no question, I can further ask my speakers about the kind of logistical challenges of working in the public in terms of financial resources, in terms of negotiations with all bodies in different institutions, which you all have kind of briefly touched upon. But maybe we can talk a little bit about that in terms of how that logistical challenges in turn affect or constrain the way artists work in public. Is that ever happened in your practice?
I think it is quite evident that compared to an art institution, the reality, the wildlife of a city or even of a landscape is a big challenge for everybody. So you were mentioned that negotiation is a big part of our work, but it's also finance, because it's if you work in the public, then you have many limitations to deal with. Security is only one, but a very crucial one, and that makes it much more expensive. So the funding is, I would say, quite a part of my work, and then it's technique. Artists, they might have good ideas, but we should make it happen, and that's not always easy, and sometimes you have to really adapt the work, to its context. So the context might sometimes also kill a project. So we decided also several times not to realize, because we thought, okay, the adaptation to the context would be too strong and would kill the artistic idea.
On that note, I wonder, is there any kind of different in terms of the curatorial process of working with public art? How is that different from, say, working with a curated show inside a regular kind of exhibition space?
It's more complicated, but it's the same. So I would say.
No, I think it's very much the same. I think maybe what happens with public art slightly differently, in my experience at least, is like you have certain constraints that pop up maybe later in the process than you expected, whereas maybe making exhibitions indoors or in a gallery setting, you kind of are generally aware of the type of constraints that you might meet along the way. More surprises.
Bill, any thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it ends up being about the sort of unknown unknowns, right? The things that sort of pop up when things seem to be going smoothly. A lot of our work is kind of working in anticipation of, but also eventually around those. Yeah, I think there's just such a wide range of exhibition making practices kind of at work in even in a given institution or a given location at any one time. It's been really interesting to see the landscape here become more and more complex as time has gone on, and also just to see an actual public emerge around contemporary art in this, I think, in this city, in this context in particular, because if you think about when Liu Wei first started working, when we first started working, it was still much more the mode of artists really making work for each other and for a very self-selected kind of community of people who cared, right? And the idea that now you have a broad base of mostly younger people who consider going to an exhibition as something you might choose to do with your afternoon, in the same way that you might go to a mall or a movie, is actually a really big and I think kind of empowering change for this scene in particular. I guess because I think a lot of people, having this kind of conversation in China, it's easy to get stuck up on what isn't possible, and maybe just end on a note of kind of I still think fairly well justified optimism even in light of all kinds of different tensions out there.
I mean, for your institution, you recently had an exhibition in the offsite, which involved a lot of public art projects, or a few, right? At least I read Nabuchi's work was made outdoor.
Yeah. No, we opened a sort of satellite location, buried under the sand by the ocean, in Beijing, which is like 300 kilometers from here.
And is that the whole project involving all public art projects, or?
Yeah, you could sort of say that in a way, because, well, this again gets back to public versus private, right? You're in this, it's part of this community, which is itself a kind of delineated, semi-private parcel, right? Like any kind of xiaoqu, like sort of kind of community or area in China, happens to be by the sea, but it's at the same time, most of the visitors who go there for, it's called Aranya, Anaya, people who go there are maybe going to experience a kind of art environment, a culture environment, as much as they are, a specific exhibition. So the museum itself there is almost like a public art, and the pieces, by this architect Liu Wei, many of the pieces sort of, at least in the first show and in the sort of next show as well, are sort of really playing with that, the notion of their site being, near a sea that's rising, and being kind of at a site of sort of leisure and removed from the city. So, we have a project opening today in Macau, at the MGM Cotai Casino, on a thing called The Spectacle, which is the world's largest array of permanent indoor LED screens, with this young artist called Du Changquan from Hangzhou, who's actually worked, it's who we've shown in shows here, but who we kind of worked with to commission a piece especially for this array of screens that will be, from now until September. It's like an 18-minute loop of all kinds of works of his that completely takes over this commercial, indoor plaza and basically a mall outside of a casino. But for 18 minutes, 3 times a day, anyone who happens to be walking across that space will be sort of sucked into this completely other sort of reality. So that's exciting, right? Those are people who, the vast majority of them have never heard of UCCA. They maybe haven't been to Beijing, and they're not lining up to come see, the latest installment of our New Direction series, or to come attend a talk like this. But who knows? I mean, I think so much of the importance and the joy of what we do is about creating moments of random encounter and kind of serendipity that could potentially be life-changing in ways that are really difficult to anticipate or certainly to measure. So
I'm also very interested in the process of kind of determining what goes to the public. And so I would like you to maybe talk a little bit in terms of giving some examples of how you decide, or how, when before a work is going public, is there a certain kind of screening process? What was the decision process that involved in determining what goes to the public? Maybe you could talk a little bit about that. Maybe Chris, can I ask you to?
It's a little bit depending of the context and of the budget and of the money source. If it's public money involved, so we have a clearly regulated process. Starting from a certain limit, we have to publish a competition. Not an open call, but we are asked to invite a group of artists to work on proposals, and we invite a selection committee of specialists who then make their choice. So it is a transparent process which is published and which is clearly transparent. And but then we have curated projects, and then it's like every exhibition in a white cube. So it's the curator who is making the selection and who is inviting the artist and who is working with them. So that's depending on them. And then sometimes, if it's really a huge thing, we publish an open call. So that's also possible. And the most open call is, like I said, is a votation. You know, when the whole population is discussing on an artwork and giving a yes or a no at the end. So that's the final democratic choice.
Claire, when you work in the Shenzhen Sculpture Biennale, what was the kind of, when the work went on public, was there a particular kind of process of screening the work involved?
I mean, we had selected that artwork and we knew we wanted to try and put it in the public space within Shenzhen. And then I think we worked with the OCAP team to try and identify a place, maybe with you very much so. But it was in the Windows of the World MTR, or metro station, which is the most visited station in Shenzhen. So it was a location that I think seemed like it would have the most visibility, even if it wasn't right by the OCAT site.
Then when you were working in public, what was usually, like you were saying that you were working with artists to turn an area into a playground. And when you are trying to do that, was there a certain kind of authority that you have to appeal to in order for that project to go through? What was the process?
So the one I talked about before in Basel, it didn't involve playgrounds, but there was a board. And I had to discuss all the project with the board. The same as Christoph explained, there we had to do competitions mostly because it was public money, so that's the way to do it. And one thing we once did, so they asked me to, roundabouts in streets, and that has become a very popular thing to put art there. So I am against it because I think it brings back exactly the kind of pedestal with the sculpture on top that you have to admire. It's like the king on the horse on the pedestal in Paris. So then I said, okay, I do it under one condition, only if we can do a totally public competition. Everybody can submit projects. So we made a map. We explained very well the steps. And we sent it out to schools and everywhere we could. And we got, I think, 280 proposals. So it was all anonymous. So that was going to maybe the farthest or into everybody can be an artist and do something for the city idea. We didn't know what to expect, but then we exposed them, we showed them all publicly. So that was it's a bit like the process with the house that got voted on. The whole process leading to the final thing on that roundabout was as important as the object. So people could come and see who did what and what kind of ideas had been done, and finally we choose one project. So there are all sorts of ways to handle it, and I think is part of it. And the interesting part of it is. there is a lot of experience and experiments involved. It's quite an adventure. That whole thing, art in public space, is quite an adventure, and it's not fixed. So that's also the appealing thing. Maybe sometimes compared to institutions where you have always the same walls. If you go out into the public space, there are no walls. It's like a museum without wall, right? So you have, it's challenging, but it's also the fun of it.
I think you've given us the perfect ending to today's panel. To work in the public is like to work in a museum without wall, and it's an adventure, and it's fun, but it's a lot of challenges as well. With that, I want to thank all of you for being with us, and all of my speakers for their contributions. Thank you. Thank you.